there's a lot of folks still there, so I will wait until I have no more. For the moment, I have no more. Oh, they keep coming in. Mary, if you're co-host, and I sort of am just doing a few intros, could you also admit people if you see folks in the waiting room? Well, hello, everybody. Good morning. I am Preeti Joshi. Sorry, I'm getting blurred. I have been the chair of the Digital Events Committee, and this is in fact the very last digital event that I will be chair of. After that, Allison Chapman, who is here, wave your hand, Allison. Allison, who is our VP, will take over digital events. So I'm really thrilled to be doing this event, and basically I'll quickly tell you the sort of scope of things. I'm just here running the show, but I'm going to first hand over to Kristen Hondurk, who's going to say just a really quick an opportunity for folks, share that opportunity. And then I will hand over, and I'm going to tell you, so I'm going to hand over to Matthew Stevens, who is one of our current grad reps. And the whole idea for this event was actually Mary Grant. Go ahead and wave your hand, Mary. Mary Grant, who's our communications coordinator, first had this idea. And at the time, Mary was our grad rep. And then Mary and Matthew have organized this. And it is, as I mentioned to folks earlier, I've been doing this 2 years. We've never had so many people registered. We've never had so many people in events, 72 and still coming. So clearly, Mary and Matthew hit upon something that there is a great need for. So with that, I'm going to stop speaking and I'm going to let Kristen do a quick small pitch, and then Matthew, over to you.
Thank you, Preeti. Hi, everybody. So if you don't know me, I am Kristen Konderlich. I am the RSVP bibliographer. So I'm here to pitch you on the RSVP bibliography. We are very fortunate to have I think we now have 50 people on our team, which is incredible. So we have folks who are helping us get the full scope of everything that is published within the field of Victorian periodicals within in this case, a 4-year period, which is long. So there's a lot of material to cover, as you can guess. So I'm still recruiting for the 2020 to 2024 bibliography. What we do essentially is everybody signs up for 1 or 2 publications. Some folks take on more, and I know I have some of my reviewers here, and you do amazing work and wonderful work. And you write a very short description of articles that you run across that relate to Victorian periodicals, newspapers, and journalism. And you create a set of keywords. We create a big old index that organizes the material, and then we put it all together and publish it in the VPR, which is very exciting. Last time we had over 500 entries. I anticipate more this time because we are covering a slightly longer time period. It's a good opportunity if you're a grad student or early career researcher because it's very low pressure. You can pick something that has that fits your interests if we have it left. Unfortunately, we don't have that many things left at this point, but it's very low commitment as well. It's an every 2 years thing, and I re-up everybody every 2 years, check in, make sure you're ready to go. And it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty useful, I think, as well. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say. If you want to volunteer, you can email at rsvpbibliography@gmail.com, which I'll drop that in the chat.
Yeah, would you mind dropping it in the chat? Yeah, that'd be great.
And I'll put my personal email in there, my work email in there as well, just in case you have other questions. Great. So I will pop that in there.
Great, thank you so much. And Matthew, I'm going to hand over to you just very quickly. I forgot to mention this. I have another meeting at the top of the next hour, so we're going to have Elizabeth and Alex talk, and then we hope to have lots of questions. If I go off, hopefully you all can still stick around. But if I go off and you all can and you all get cut off, Matthew is going to share his email if folks want to continue the conversation. But you all should be able to continue while I go to my next actually RSVP meeting. So over to you, Matthew.
Okay, thank you, Preeti. And again, I add my welcome to those you've already had, to everybody, especially to those who aren't members of the Society. Just a few words about why you should be. The Research Society for Victorian Periodicals is a really supportive and cooperative international scholarly community. We come from a number of disciplines as members, including history, English, media studies, art, gender sexuality studies and digital humanities, amongst others. Basically, if you've got any kind of interest in 19th century print culture, you're in. The subscription is not only very affordable, I think my last one was $81 for 2 years, but it also includes a subscription to Victorian Periodicals Review, our quarterly journal at no additional cost. So if you're not already a member, please do consider joining us. It's very much worth it. So what we're here to do today, apart from that little plug, is to hear from people at Edinburgh University Press who are directly involved with publishing academic research in journals and books. It's aimed at everybody, but especially, I think, useful to early career researchers and graduate students like me. So I'm now going to introduce our speakers, a little indication of what they're going to cover, and then I'll hand over to our first speaker. So our first speaker today is going to be Alex Oxford, who completed her BA in Modern and Medieval Languages at the University of Cambridge. After graduating, she joined Edinburgh University Press, and she's now Journal's publishing executive, where she won the Association of Learned and Professional Society Publishers Rising Star Award in 2023 for her work on the press's ECR resources. And Alex is going to speak to us about preparing academic research for journal publications, and she's also going to highlight some of the journals published by Edinburgh University Press that might be a good fit for us as Victorian scholars and scholars of periodical research, 19th century art and literature. Our second speaker, Elizabeth Fraser, completed an undergraduate degree in social anthropology at the University of Edinburgh, and then an MA in postcolonial studies at the University of Kent. Since graduating, she's worked in non-fiction publishing, and she's currently senior assistant editor for literary studies at Edinburgh University Press. And Elizabeth naturally is going to talk to us about preparing manuscripts and how to submit book ideas to a press like EUP. And it's now my great pleasure to hand over to our first speaker, Alex.
We're actually going to switch things up, and I think Lizzie is going to do our little introduction.
Okay. Fair enough.
And then I will take over to talk about journals.
Yeah, that's right, Alex. Matthew, is that all looking as you expect with the PowerPoint?
Yes, that's coming onto my screen well.
Fantastic. So as Alex said, I'm just going to do a little introduction first of all. So hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having us. My name is Elizabeth Fraser, and as Matthew said, I'm Senior Assistant Editor for Literary Studies. I attended the RSVP conference in Stirling this summer, and we're very happy to have made connections there that have led to this presentation today. Thank you to everyone at RSVP who's made this possible. With me today is Alex to cover the journal side of things, because obviously if you are at an early career stage, you may be thinking of journals before you think of books. So we wanted to bring both sides of our publishing program to you today. I'll just move the slide on. Sorry about that, technical problems. So to start with telling you a little bit about Edinburgh University Press as an organisation, we're an arts and humanities publisher originally founded in the 1940s. We've been a subsidiary of the University of Edinburgh since the 1990s. We're currently what's known as a mid-sized university press. So to give a little bit of context, when it comes to British university presses, Oxford and Cambridge would be known as large, while presses like Manchester, Bristol and Edinburgh sit in that mid-sized category. We publish over 270 books and 59 journals a year across 10 subject areas. And for books, this includes research monographs, edited collections, scholarly reference works, textbooks and critical editions. Presumably the most relevant of our subject areas for RSVP is literary studies, but we also publish in classics and ancient history, film, media and cultural studies, Islamic and Middle Eastern studies, language and linguistics, law, philosophy, politics and Scottish studies. So with that said, I'll hand over to Alex to tell us about journals publishing.
Thank you very much. I would also like to thank Lizzie for inviting me to this talk after meeting with Mary and Sterling. I'm very, very happy to be here. And yeah, I'm going to cover more of the journal side of things. The main sections that I'm going to be covering are how to go about finding the right journal for your article once you've written your work. And then I'll go through a couple of our journals and how you can kind of use those as examples to maybe narrow down a shortlist or decide on your priorities. I'm going to go about how to avoid predatory journals when you're looking for places to submit. And then I'll finally touch on open access at the end, as I know that that was a key thing that a lot of people were interested in knowing more about. So to start off, a quick introduction to the editorial team at Edinburgh University Press for journals. We have two journals development editors, which are Chris and Poppy, and their various subject lists that they manage here. Poppy is possibly the more relevant one in the case of Victorian studies, as she does literary studies, and also the film, media and cultural side of things. And then I work more administratively day to day across all of the journals, and I also manage a philosophy portfolio. So next slide, please, Lizzie. So yes, I'm going to start with talking about finding the right journal. So when you spent months or maybe even years researching and writing your article, deciding where to submit can really seem like a daunting task. There are loads of journals out there, and it can be really, really difficult to narrow them down and pick which one might be right for you. So the process that I'm going to suggest here today will not only help you to identify a journal for your current manuscript, but hopefully will give you a helpful shortlist for any of your future work. So the first step that we would recommend is to compile a long list, as it were, of all the potential journals that you could submit your work to. There are several ways to go about this. For example, you could start looking at which journals you have cited in your own work. As they've informed your paper, it's likely that similarly they would be quite relevant for you to submit to. Similarly, you could ask where people in your department have previously submitted on similar subjects. This can be quite helpful because you can also find out how good of an experience they had during that submission process. You can also ask your library, see which journals they subscribe to, and the librarians might be able to guide you to titles in your field that you'd not previously considered. And then the final thing would be to consult the internet. You can search for your keywords on Google Scholar and see which journals kind of show up on those first couple of pages of search results. That can also be a good indicator if the journal is tracking quite highly on those search results, that they have good visibility in the field that you're looking for, and that could bode well for the visibility of your article later down the line. So once you've got that long list, that's a working list, that's an evolving document that you can maintain and adapt for your research going forward. It might feel like a lot of work in the beginning, but it really helps beyond just your first article. So it's definitely worth doing. So once you've got that list, we would then recommend that you decide what you want to get out of this publication specifically. So setting your priorities. For example, are you looking to reach a really broad audience, or would you prefer to reach a much more concentrated readership that might bode well to have higher engagement with your work, for example, citations? Also, how will the perception of the journal impact the perception of your paper? So would you rather go for a journal that's known for spotlighting early career researchers, for example, or would you prefer one that is perhaps more established and has that very traditional reputation? Or perhaps you want to go for one that is very kind of cutting edge and known for being at the forefront of its field. Timing can also be one. Perhaps you are rushing to meet a deadline in terms of assessment of your research output, and so you need something published really quickly. You can always check a journal's website. They should usually have that information there on the time from either submission to publication or from final decision to publication. So that's something that you can quite quickly check as well. And then also promotion options and what available promotion opportunities there are for you with a particular journal. So for example, at Edinburgh University Press, we have our blog, which all of our authors are welcome to write for, and it receives between 6,000 and 9,000 views every month. So it's a really good place to spotlight your work if you would like to. Similarly, promoting all of our new issues on social media and through our subject mailing lists. So again, seeing how much promotion is available and also how much you want to engage with, or if you prefer not to. And then finally, are there any fees associated with submitting? And have you got funding to cover those? Do they seem like legitimate fees, or could these be the sign of a predatory journal? And again, I'll come on to predatory journals slightly later in the presentation. So once you've got that long list and you've got your priorities, you can now go through the list and narrow down into more of a short list which of the journals would suit for this particular paper. So for example, a way to do this can be to look at the journal's scope. You can look at their recent issues and also the journal submission requirements and see which ones would match up best with your work. So again, you would look at submission requirements. Does your paper meet those? How easy is it to find other articles in the journal? Do they show up on Google Scholar's first page? Or perhaps you've seen them promoted on Twitter? Again, kind of boding well for your own article to get quite good visibility, because those processes to refine your keywords and do that search engine optimization might already be in place. And similarly, so again, that discoverability, sorry, got lost in my notes there. One final thing that I'd really like to flag is that rejection is unfortunately a very normal part of the publishing process. Your supervisors, your colleagues, or any established academic will be able to tell you stories about papers of theirs that were rejected and then were eventually published and did really, really well. So please do not be discouraged if your manuscript is rejected from your first choice journal. Please take any advice or suggestions that you've received from the editors or the peer reviewers, and we would recommend making those changes and then moving on to the next journal on your list. So to put this idea of different journals meeting different wants and needs into practice, I've taken a look at some of Edinburgh University Press's journals and how this would apply to them. At the end of the day, your whole shortlist would likely be a great fit for your work, but being this kind of specific and nuanced in your decision making can really help with narrowing down that shortlist or ranking it and putting it in order. So the first one that I've picked is Victoriographies, which might be familiar already to some of you. This one is very slap bang in the middle of Victorian studies and the long 19th century. Because this one launched in 2011, the journal is kind of out of the age range to be considered a startup, but it's still young enough to be growing and developing and kind of at the forefront of its field. It also, because it is very much in Victorian studies, it has the perfect readership for an article in that field. And they're also a journal that's known for working really well with early career researchers through the submission and post-acceptance process. Similarly, with the journal's focus being on the time period specifically, this could be really helpful if your work is more comparative in other areas, for example. So it might be looking across different media, or it could be across the Victorian era as a whole, or the entire 19th century, or it could be looking at different geographical locations. But it is possible that your work might have a different focus. So if you're working perhaps in a more literary space, it might be that your work is more kind of limited to a genre. So the second journal that I've picked out is Gothic Studies, which is our next slide, I think. Perfect. So again, this one is much more genre focused, particularly on the Gothic, and it spans outside of the 19th century, but is also very much containing the 19th century. This could work especially well if you're looking at the genre across a larger time frame, for example, or you could be comparing a solidly Victorian work with other conventions of the genre. But this doesn't have to be the case. So, for example, one of the special issues of this journal in 2024 was on Melmoth and its global afterlives. So again, excuse me, would highlight the kind of the global focus of the journal. It partners with the International Gothic Association. So again, if you're spanning different geographical regions, this could be a good one. So I'd also like to flag this journal will be a subscribed to open journal as of 2025. So I'll explain a little bit more detail later on what that means. But again, it's a journal where there would be an opportunity to publish open access. And so that could factor into your decision. Next, it is also possible that you could be working on a particular region. So I've flagged two journals here that are more regional focused. One is Studies in Scottish Literature, which is new for 2025. The cover is not finalised yet, so I thought I'd put in a photo of a lovely Scottish lion. But this one is new to us, but it has a very established background. It started publishing in the 1960s and has that kind of strong reputation and academic rigor to come with it. And the second one that I have flagged is Irish University Review. So again, it's quite an established journal. It was founded in 1970 and could suit very well if you're writing about a particular region or culture, in this case, Ireland or Irishness. The journal's also a really great example of a more interdisciplinary or comparative work, as they have opened up their scope to cover literature in any and all forms, from like prose and poetry to art or print media or beyond that. And similarly, they're open to a variety of connections to Ireland and Irish culture and Irishness, to include heritage, to include the wider diaspora. And so there's a really kind of broad interpretation there of what would fit into the journal. So again, it could be good fit if your work is more interdisciplinary. So next, I am going to talk through, as you know, we are an ever-expanding number of legitimate journals. We've also seen a rise in the number of predatory journals over the past decade or so. Publishing in a predatory journal will not only cost you a lot of money, they will often charge extortionate fees to publish in something that won't be peer-reviewed and won't be copy-edited or typeset. And then you lose the career benefits and exposure that you would receive when publishing in a legitimate journal, because once it's published, you can't submit it to be published again. On the surface, it can be really difficult to tell a predatory journal from a legitimate one, but there are a few telltale signs to look out for, so I'm going to talk through some of those. The first one would be unsolicited emails. So legitimate journals may invite submissions to their journal via email, but they'll usually be quite detailed. They'll give information on what they would like you to write, when they would need the manuscript by, all of that kind of detail. If you receive something very generic, it's likely to be predatory. Similarly, looking back at the previous articles that the journal has published, they're likely to be of quite low quality if they're in a predatory journal. As I said, they usually aren't peer-reviewed or edited or typeset, and so it can look very low quality and will often be published at very inconsistent times. While some legitimate journals do now work on a continuous publication model, so preprint or ahead of print, that's usually flagged. And so again, it's something to look out for when you look at the journal's website or any records of their publication. Website omissions are also a really big thing. So a journal should have its aims and scope on its website, author submission guidelines, and also probably a list of the editorial board as well. That can be a really big red flag if that isn't there. They'll often also list any associations that they have with other bodies or societies. So for example, publishers, scholarly societies, or academic institutions. So for predatory journals, these might not exist, or they may instantly be made up, particularly now by ChatGPT. That tends to be a thing that happens quite a lot now. So again, one thing that we'd recommend is perhaps checking the personal pages or faculty pages of journal editors or board members, just to see if that journal is listed within their roles and responsibilities or within their publications and their titles. And then finally, the big sign to look out for is fees. So as I may have said before, some legitimate publishers may perhaps charge for submission or publication or page fees, but they will try to keep these costs as low as possible. They'll be upfront and transparent about those costs. At Edinburgh University Press, there are no charges to submit anything, and there are only very rarely charges if you are publishing via one of the routes of Gold Open Access, or perhaps if you are asking for colour printing or something kind of out of the norm of that journal's production process. So you should know about these fees in advance. They should be very transparent. What predatory journals will tend to do instead is they will only alert you to the fees once you've been accepted. If that's the case, we would very much recommend that you withdraw your article, which you can do at any time, and you would clearly state to the journal editor or the administrator that you do not wish to publish with them. If after all of that, you're still unsure of whether your journal is legitimate or not, you can always talk to supervisors, colleagues, or a really key one is librarians, because they often know what to look out for. And we would also recommend using the Think, Check, Submit checklist, which I've put a link to here. It's thinkchecksubmit.org. Okay, hopefully I've not given you too much to overload with at the moment. The final thing that I'm going to cover is open access in journals. So open access is becoming a bigger and bigger part of the publishing industry, and there are still a lot of common misconceptions around that. So I wanted to give everyone here a little bit more of an idea about what it entails, whether it's something that you would like to seek out in your future publications, and whether it's something that is an option for you. So the first thing that I really want to clarify is that open access does not just mean freely available. People often use the terms interchangeably. They can actually be very different things. The main two reasons, or the main two ways in which they differ, are under these two things. So licenses and permanent versus temporary. So an open access article will be published under what's called a Creative Commons license. This allows reuse of the content for free, often with some restrictions around whether it can be used commercially or whether any derivatives can be made of the work, but it will be free to reuse. Similarly, open access articles will always be free for anyone to access once something is open access that can't be taken away. On the flip side, things that are just free to read, you would still have to pay to reuse that content. And similarly, that free to read barrier, well, not barrier, the barrier of the paywall can be put back in place at any time by the publisher or by the editor. But yes, that because it's free to read now does not mean it will always be free to read, whereas open access is a state that can't be reverted. So there are a few different routes of publishing open access. The first one I'm going to talk about is green. So under green open access, you're allowed to post or archive an early version of your manuscript. This is usually done via an institutional repository, but it can also be done via a personal or departmental website, or perhaps a subject repository. The key benefit of this form of open access is that there is no cost to you as an author. It's also compliant with most funder requirements, so that can be really, really helpful as well. It does require a bit more administration on the author's part, as often it's the author who needs to deposit the manuscript themselves. This isn't something that most publishers will do, but you can always ask the publisher on how that is done. We can always provide some advice. It just means that there's a little bit more admin on your side. The next one that I'm going to talk about is gold open access. So when people talk about OA, this is usually what they're talking about. This means that the author will usually pay an article processing charge, or an APC, to the publisher, and then the version of record, so the version that's shiny and typeset and published in the journal, is the one that is made open access. This one means that your APC payment will cover the costs of producing the article for the publisher. So it means, means that it's sustainable for the publisher, at least. Obviously, I'm aware that puts a lot of the onus on the author to get the funding. It's not the most sustainable way for the authors themselves, particularly in the humanities. But it does also mean that the processes behind making it open access are all handled by the publisher. Once you've made your payment, there is no difference for you between publishing a paywalled article and publishing gold open access. There are a couple of others that I'm going to mention. The first one is diamond or platinum open access. So this is where a journal is entirely gold open access, and then all of those article processing charges are covered by a funding body or an institution. Usually it's a university, so we have one diamond open access journal at the moment, which is called Film Philosophy, and that one is funded by the University of Edinburgh. So they pay, in effect, all of the APCs so that the author does not have to pay, and then after that it's the exact same process. And then the final one that I'm going to mention is Subscribe to Open. So this is an open access model that is growing in popularity, and under this model, the journal will still receive subscriptions as normal, and it's those subscriptions across multiple institutions that collectively fund the publishing open access. So in a way, it spreads that cost over multiple institutions. So again, there is no charge to the author, and it's more of an equitable form of open access. We have been trialing this at Edinburgh University Press. So in 2024, we launched it for 2 of our Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies journals, and then we've now decided to launch it further for 2025 Gothic Studies, which is one of the journals that I mentioned, that will be part of that pilot for 2025. And there's plenty more information about the model on our website if you would like to see more. That is me done. So I will hand back to Lizzie to talk about the book side of things.
Thanks, Alex, for that fantastic and thorough overview of EUP's journals publishing. So as Alex says, I'm going to move on to books. Similarly to journals, if you're at the point where you want to publish a book, the first step is choosing the right home for it, choosing the right publisher. Again, very similarly to journals, you're going to want to start with making a list of presses that you know publish in your subject area, because not all presses do publish in every subject area. Again, check the bibliographies of the books that you're reading and citing in your own research, particularly if you have a favorite book or particularly like how it's produced. See about who published them and add them to your list. Once you have that initial list, you can narrow down by considering points such as how prestigious is the press in terms of the topic you study within the overall subject area? What's the intended audience for your book, and does this press have a track record of reaching that audience? And does this press have any series your book could fit into? It's also advisable to think about practical aspects like timings. So what are the review timelines like at this publisher? How long will it take to receive feedback on your proposal if it's selected for peer review? For the proposal, do they ask for just sample chapters, or do they ask for a full draft manuscript with the proposal? If they do ask for a full draft manuscript, is that even feasible for you? Do you have the time to write this full draft straight away, or would you rather just have a couple of samples to start with and then write the book later? If the book is then contracted, how long does the production process take? So how far in the future would they be likely to publish your book? And how does this fit into your career trajectory, particularly if you're wanting to submit a promotion portfolio? This information is all available on a press's website, so just make sure you've done your due diligence and checked timelines suit you. You'll also need to check the terms of your research funding. So funders are increasingly specifying that research output has to be published open access, as Alex alluded to with journals. You should always be clear about this when you're proposing books to presses, and you can look on their websites to find out their open access policies and the types of open access they offer, and whether that's compatible with what your funder wants. In addition to this internet research, remember to utilize your network. So always be talking to colleagues about their experiences with academic publishing, if they've had favorite presses, if they've had particularly good experiences or less good experiences. Also look out for opportunities to meet publishing staff at conferences, to chat about how things work, see the books they've brought with them as examples of what your book could look like if you published with them. On the slide, we've got a photo of the EUP stand at the RSVP conference in Stirling this summer. So this is kind of what you'll be looking out for. They're often in the area where you can get your tea and coffee at the breaks. Many of you attending today may not be at the point of proposing a book if you're early career researchers, but you can still start familiarizing yourself with publishers now. So keep an eye out for what presses are publishing by following them on social media or signing up to mailing lists. This way you can start thinking about how your book would fit in their catalogue and whether you like how they market their existing books. So you've got an idea of who you'd like to publish with. You've narrowed down your press, your kind of first choice press. Your first point of contact will likely be the commissioning editor of the subject area at the press. So you can look up commissioning editors' email addresses on presses' websites. There may just be one commissioning editor for each subject area, in which case it's pretty obvious who you'd be needing to contact, but please be aware that depending on the size of the press, depending on the size of the subject area, there may be multiple commissioning editors that cover it. So make sure you do your research and find out which areas they cover, which commissioning editor best fits your topic within the subject area. So for example, at Edinburgh University Press, we have 2 commissioning editors for literary studies. Emily Sharp covers Victorian studies generally and Victorian literature, and may well be the person to submit your proposal to if you're working within the Victorian era. However, our other commissioning editor, Jackie Jones, covers the subcategories of Gothic studies and periodical criticism. So depending on your focus, it might be better to submit to her. As I've said, you can always contact our commissioning editors by email, but you may also be able to meet them in person at conferences around the UK and abroad. Please do come over to our stand if we have one. You can buy our books at a very reduced price, which is a bonus, and we're always happy to chat. Like, you don't necessarily have to have your ideas pinned down. We're really happy to explain our publishing processes and kind of get the ball rolling for you, even if you don't have your kind of final ideas in place or any kind of fully formed proposal yet. Commissioning editors will be happy to talk through ideas at the earliest stage to help formulate your thoughts. If you want to check that they're interested in the book idea before you go to the trouble of writing out the full proposal, please do drop them an email with kind of a summary of your book idea and ask if it might fit the list and if they'd like to see a full proposal. So when it's time to write the proposal, how do you actually go about it? So basically, the bare bones of what a proposal needs to be is a clear rationale for the book, plus a clear outline of the market for this kind of book. Show us why your book is needed and how it moves your field forward. You should check the particular press's website for their book proposal guidelines to see the exact information that you need to include. This can vary between the press, so we do recommend that you tailor your proposal each time rather than submitting the exact same material to every press. Nevertheless, saying that, we usually do ask for the same kinds of things. So usually it will be a book summary, an annotated table of contents, breakdown of the word count by chapter, a note about any kind of illustrations or extras that you want to include, your expected timeline for delivering the book, and a list of competing and comparable books, both at the press you're submitting to and at other presses, just as to kind of show that you have an overview of the market. Proposals usually come to about like 10 to 20 pages, and you'll also be asked to submit an up-to-date CV and some kind of sample material. So as I've already touched on, at Edinburgh University Press, we ask for 1 or 2 sample chapters, but other presses may ask for a full draft manuscript. So this may be something you want to avoid if you don't particularly want to write the book straight away. Who will actually read the proposal? So initially it will be read by the commissioning editor you submit to. If they like it and think it's a good fit for our list, good fit for the press, it will proceed to peer review, and it may be seen by the anonymous peer reviewers. If peer review goes well, it would then go to an academic committee. So as the name suggests, this is a committee of academics from the university press's affiliated university, which look at all proposals that receive positive review comments, and they would ultimately decide whether the press should proceed with them. In EUP's case, as you may imagine, the academic committee is made up of academics from the University of Edinburgh. So on the screen here, you should see a kind of summary of those steps with the commissioning editor as the first point of contact. So most presses ask for what we call sole consideration. So it's common to only send your proposal to one commissioning editor at a time. In other words, you can't really have multiple presses looking at your proposal at once. At Edinburgh University Press, we seek to return feedback on proposals within 12 weeks. So after that time, you'll know if you want to go forward with your proposal or not. If it turns out your proposal is maybe not suitable for our list, sole consideration is over and you could then approach a different press. You just won't be able to do multiple at once. On the other hand, if the commissioning editor thinks that the proposal is suitable, they'll offer advice and feedback on how to make it, the proposal document, as strong as possible, and then they'll send it out for anonymous peer review. You have to get 2 positive reports to proceed to the next stage. If you don't get 2 positive reports straight away, but the reviewers do kind of see potential, you may be invited to revise the proposal and then resubmit. In this case, you'd usually be asked to write a response letter to the reviewers as well, where you kind of outline the revisions that you've made and respond to what the reviewers have said. You don't have to agree with every single suggestion they have, but you do have to kind of justify why you don't think you need to change the proposal to follow their advice. once we have the 2 positive reports, as I say, it can go to academic committee who will make the final decision on whether we award you with a book contract. At that point, the commissioning editor would be in contact to negotiate the terms of your contract. So this includes royalty rates, delivery date, and the word count. Always make sure you read your contract carefully. Do send us any queries if you're not understanding it. Obviously, we do get that legal language isn't familiar to everyone, and we'll be happy to clarify anything in your contract. You may also want to check if the press has what we call a first refusal clause in the contract, which would mean that you'd have to offer your next book to them. Some people like this as it means you're kind of like establishing a relationship with the press, but you also may want to have free choice for the next book. So that's really up to you. Something else to note at this stage is if your book is going to be in a series, the process might look slightly different, just in terms of the series editors would also be weighing in on the proposal. So here we have some of our commissioning editors' top tips for making your proposal strong. So they say, provide as much information as you can in the proposal document. If in doubt, add it in rather than trying to make it sparse. Ensure the proposal document is easy to navigate and has a clear structure. Obviously, commissioning editors receive many proposals, and they'll be much more likely to read it through if they're understanding what you're trying to say to them. Avoid having very long chapters or a high overall word count. If you're proposing a monograph, typically monographs are between 80,000 and 100,000 words, although they can be slightly longer depending on the topic. Be realistic about your timeline, and if you do have to kind of revise and resubmit, make sure you're engaging with the peer reviewers' comments, take on board their constructive criticism in preparing that revised proposal. So just to go back to the second last tip, as this is an early career researcher session, or a session aimed mostly at early career researchers, be realistic about the timeline. We particularly say this to PhD students who are converting their thesis. We often get proposals suggesting a kind of 6-month turnaround for your PhD conversion. In our experience, this is very likely to be too short and will put so much pressure on you to do it. We would much rather you give yourself the time and space to prepare your monograph carefully, think about how you actually want it to be different to the PhD thesis, thinking of them as 2 separate things rather than the book just being a slightly tweaked version of the thesis. Definitely take the time that you need rather than trying to fast track or accelerate anything, seeing as this will be you know, a monumental achievement for yourself to have published a book, and you want it to be as strong as possible. So if your book has been given a book contract, at this point, the commissioning editor will introduce you to the assistant editor on your list. This is my role for literary studies at EUP. The assistant editor will be able to help with any queries you have about how to format the manuscript, or secure permissions for reprinting, you know, quotations or including illustrations, and also securing a cover image. There may also be something called a pre-production clearance review written into your contract. So this would be when, once you've prepared your draft manuscript, it will be sent back to an anonymous reviewer when you finish writing it, just to check that it looks ready to be published and it looks as if you've delivered on what you promised in your proposal. So this usually applies to books where there were only sample chapters available at the proposal stage rather than a full draft manuscript. And it's just so that an anonymous peer reviewer has held sight of the whole thing when they've not seen the full draft in the beginning. We allocate around 6 months in total for a clearance review. So that's 3 months for the reviewer to read the manuscript, and then another 3 months for you to make any kind of recommended revisions and finalize the manuscript for good. We find most people fit with this 6-month timeline, but if there were any issues where you want to take more time or even less time, we're very happy to discuss flexibility with deadlines. Once your manuscript is fully finalized, you've got everything in place, you're happy with it, we would then hand your manuscript over to our production team. So a standard production process at EUP takes 9 months. But again, do make sure you're checking this for different presses because other presses can take significantly longer. Some presses can also take slightly less. In the production stage, you'll be looked after by what we call a desk editor who will guide you through the process of copy editing, and then proofreading and indexing your book if you've opted to index it yourself. Our cover designers will also be in conversation with you about how the cover of your book should look. In some cases, you'll be working with, if your book's in a series, so for example, the image of the vampire book that's on this slide, that's our Gothic series. There may be a template already that you're just kind of tweaking the colors off or making it slightly distinct, whereas it's kind of uniform across the series. Otherwise, if you have a standalone book, you'll maybe be entirely getting to choose what the cover looks like at Edinburgh University Press. And then throughout the production process, our marketing team will also start working with you on how to promote the book in the lead up to the publication date. Initially, your book will be released in hardback and ebook formats. So the ebook formats are PDF and EPUB with us. The paperback will then follow within 12 to 18 months, and that will be priced lower than the initial hardback and ebook price, just to make it a little bit more accessible. So that's really an overview of our publishing processes and our proposal and submission guidelines. This does apply basically to all of our books, but again, as I've already highlighted, it can be slightly different if you're in a series rather than what we call a standalone book. So for instance, whereas if your book is a standalone, it would go to an external clearance reviewer. If your book's in a series, the clearance review may be done by the series editor. So similar to Alex highlighting the journals that we have at Edinburgh University Press that you might be interested in, I'm going to highlight just a few of our series. The main one for people interested in Victorian literature and Victorian culture would be our 19th century and Neo-Victorian cultures series. So this series encourages proposals for books that focus on the Victorian era in its broadest and most diverse sense, including research on art, literature, history, performance, data studies, film and TV studies, and the medical humanities. An example of a book from this series that you can see on the screen is The Idlers Club by Laura Cason-Fiss, which recently won the Victorian Popular Fiction Association First Book Prize. We also have our Interventions in 19th Century American Literature and Culture series, if you are on the American side of things. This publishes new work in American literary studies, focusing on the long 19th century, as the name suggests. Another long-running series we have is Edinburgh Critical Studies in Romanticism, which is for research monographs that take an inclusive and internationalist view of British Romanticism. And then finally, I've highlighted a couple of our Edinburgh Companion series that encompass edited collections focusing, for example, on periodical criticism or Victorian Gothic literature. It's perhaps worth emphasizing here that when aiming to publish a book, you might want to start with contributing a chapter to edited collections that are being edited by others and work your way up to publishing your own research monograph or edited collection. This can kind of help you dip your toe in the world of publishing in the same way that submitting a journal article helps with this. When it then does come to submitting your own book proposal, it will help the commissioning editor kind of see that you're serious and committed to writing your own book if you already have the experience of successfully writing book chapters or journal articles listed on your CV. So that's a whistle-stop tour of books publishing at Edinburgh University Press. Before we finish up, Alex is going to tell us a little bit about the Early Career Researcher Hub.
Yes, excuse me. So a lot of the information that you've heard today and much more is available on our Early Career Researcher Hub, which we've been developing for, I want to say, almost 5 years at this point. We've got 10 guides up at the moment that cover different aspects of both books and journal publishing, covering everything from finding a journal, peer review, submitting a book proposal, the production process, what happens post-acceptance, to promoting your work and kind of the follow-on after something has been published. We have the link here to the full guides, but you can also find it by just going to our website. It's like clearly signposted, and we definitely recommend checking it out. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody. I'm not sure, I'll maybe hand back to Matthew. I'm not sure how long we've got for questions and that kind of thing. And obviously, yes, we have our emails there as well, if you want to contact us after this.
That's great. Could I ask that you stop sharing your screen, please? That'd be helpful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, yes, and thanks to Elizabeth and Alex for those really detailed and information-packed presentations. Really helped to demystify the whole world of publishing, I think, for many of us. We don't have very long. I know Preeti has to go quite soon. Some of us maybe have to stay a little bit longer, but I think what I would say is if people have questions they haven't already put into the chat, and there's a few in there now which we'll try and deal with, if you either put them in or use the raised hand little icon on your screens. I don't think I can see everybody because there are over 80 of us, but I'll make my screen as big as I can. But if I start off with a couple of the questions that have been put in the chat, I think, Ronald, you put the first one in, but I suspect Elizabeth dealt with that in terms of book cover design. So if it's okay with you, I'll move on to the next one, which was from Michelle. Michelle Ravenscroft, who's asked, what are the guidelines regarding material that's previously been published in journal articles? Are you going to put them in a book?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're usually fine with that. We understand, obviously, that especially a first book will be building on material that you've already discussed in journal articles. So we usually just ask that you've cleared all permissions with the journal or with a publisher if it's like a book chapter that's previously been in an edited collection somewhere else. When you did that article or book chapter originally, and perhaps you had a contract or a contributor agreement, you should be able to look in there to see what the copyright information was and your rights for reprinting it. Otherwise, you can kind of query that further with the publisher. The only thing to watch out for perhaps with that is occasionally, say it's an edited collection, we sometimes do edited collections where we want it to be all original research. So in that case, we'd be asking you to consider whether the journal article is kind of being reprinted verbatim or like extremely similar to how you've written it before, or whether it's kind of considered original enough and changed enough and kind of evolved since the last time we published it to count as original research. So I hope that helps that question.
Thank you.
I can answer that a little bit as well from the journal side of things. So I know at UP, for example, all of our contributor agreements for journals very much stipulate that the author retains the right to be able to reuse their own work free of charge. And I believe that's fairly standard across most publishers. And if you publish open access, then that would automatically be absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you both very much. I'll move swiftly on because we do have here to get through. This one's quite a big question, actually. How are external peer reviewers chosen? Do you have a register of them, or how do you go about it? That's from Claire Horrocks.
Yeah, so something that we do ask as part of the proposal is for you to send a list of suggested reviewers. So we'll take a look at that. We'll also add names that we think, we would like to hear from, making sure that we are assessing the proposal from kind of different angles, like say it's kind of interdisciplinary, or if it considers different aspects such as race and gender, we're making sure that we have reports that consider the full range of what your book covers. So it's a combination of the ones that you suggest and also the ones that we would like to hear from. And we also try pretty hard to make sure that we're considering kind of like the demographics of who the reviewers are. So that's geographic location, making sure that they're not necessarily from the same country, and that we have kind of spread of people in terms of gender and aspects like that. This is really just to work on unconscious bias in peer reviewing practices.
Okay, thank you. Right, next question from C. Miller, this one. Sorry, it seems to be me asking them all, but I promise I am asking genuine questions from other people. Should you expect acknowledgement of or receipt of submission to a journal, or just wait for their considered rejection?
That is a very good
when you send
question.
something, do you get anything initially, I think is what that means.
I would say that while possibly not every journal will send acknowledgement or receipt of submission, it's definitely something you can ask for, especially because it would be expected you would only submit to one journal at a time. And so obviously you want to make sure that your submission is being considered, so that if it's not, you can get a decision, then you can take it elsewhere. We would often recommend, it is quite common to receive acknowledgement or receipt of submission, but obviously sometimes the odd one gets missed. We would recommend waiting maybe 2 to 3 weeks, at most a month, before getting back in touch with the editor and asking for a confirmation of receipt if you haven't received anything yet. At which point they should be able to kind of update you on the status of your article, whether it's kind of gone up peer review, whether it's been perhaps not seen as a good fit for the journal, and then you can go from there.
Great, thanks, Alex. Another question about journals and fees. This is from Amelia Wong-Merzero. She said she wasn't aware that authors may have to pay fees when publishing. Is this common with academic publishers? And is there not a fee that's paid to the author for their writing? I think we know the answer to that, but please just enlighten us more.
So it's not very common, particularly amongst university presses, especially. I think it's possibly more of a thing with private publishers. But yes, it's not very common at all to have to pay a fee when publishing. It's also unfortunately not very common that authors will be paid anything for writing in a journal. Typically, if a journal receives royalties, those will go to the journal editor or the owners of the journal. So it might be an academic institution or a society. Yes, you won't have to pay any money most of the time, but you also won't receive any money, unfortunately.
That's fair enough. That's part of the course. But you do get the kudos, I think, of getting your work published, which is really what
Yeah.
this is all in, isn't it? Preeti, if you're still with us, would you like to say anything at this point before you have to leave, or perhaps you had to go already? There she is. You're still muted. You're muted, Preeti. There we are.
Sorry, I was having a whole conversation with my screen. We have about 3 more minutes. I'm going to see if it works for me to just use my different computer for my second meeting. So this is really great. People are really enjoying it. People have tons of questions. I am going to save the chat and forward it. So if people want to take the next few minutes and put things in the chat, I will save the chat. Let's see if it works for me to mute this and go to my other computer and my other meeting. So keep going, folks.
Will do. Thank you very much. Okay, so the next question I have from Sarah Bliss. When it comes to locating a journal or a press in which to publish, would you be willing to share any tips or advice for working out how prestigious it might be?
Yeah, so in terms of finding a journal, some of the typical markers that are good to look out for are kind of impact factors, which kind of look at the level of citations that a journal receives compared with the amount of content that they publish. These can be quite difficult because often they are time restricted. So particularly they'll look at content over, say, the last 5 years to work out that impact factor, which is slightly more problematic when you get to the humanities, when it might take 10 years for a journal or an article to reach its real kind of peak in terms of citations. So it's very much a model that's built for STEM subjects, but it can be a good place to start in terms of looking at prestige for a journal. I think similarly, perhaps looking at if you know some of the big names in your particular field, seeing where they have previously published or which journals they are currently working with, that can be a really good place to start. But similarly, I think also looking at visibility and seeing which journals you kind of notice at different events that are in your field can be a really good place to look. And there's definitely there isn't unfortunately a one size fits all advice for finding out which journal will be the best fit for you or possibly has the best reputation in your field. and whether that's exactly what you want. But I hope that that gives you a few places to start.
Yeah, certainly does. Thank you so much. A couple more that are popping up as we speak. And this one's an interesting one from Emma Dove about publishing images. If you're publishing a journal article which includes an analysis of photography, contemporary, not archival, that is, how would you go about publishing that material? Is the author responsible for getting permission to include photographers' work, or is this the responsibility of the publisher?
So this might vary depending on the publisher. At EEP, it's sort of standard practice and included in our authorship contracts that it is the author's responsibility to clear permissions for any third-party content. So yes, this would kind of be their responsibility. If there's payment involved in getting that permission, then that might be something to talk about with the journal, about whether the journal can cover that or whether there is any funding available from external bodies to cover that. But yes, that would be the author's responsibility.
Great, thank you. Another one for you, this one, Alex, from Sonal Vikram. Just to remind us, what are the steps for submitting if you wanted to go to Victoriography's journal at AUP? Are you the contact person, or if not, who is it?
So for all of our journals, the submissions contact information will be on the website, and that will be the case for most journals, I would imagine. You would be usually the journal editor, which I can send those details through in the chat later if anyone is interested, or I can just, what I can do, I'll include the URL to Victoriography's website, and I'll do the same for all of the journals that I mentioned.
Fantastic, thank you. What I think is the last question I can see in the chat. I've not seen any hands up, so this might be the last one for us. This is from Monica Rojo, asking how or where would she find peer reviewers if she's supposed to provide a list of suggested reviewers? Would she contact people cold call style to ask if they would be willing to peer review, or would the publisher have a broad list of people that they would use? That question makes sense?
Yeah. So for this one, you definitely don't need to contact them in advance and ask if they'd be willing to. It's really just if you have anyone that you'd like to look at, anyone that's quite sort of prestigious in the field, probably like mid-career and above, let's say, would be the kind of people we'd be looking at for peer review. It's really, you know, to do with the niche that you're working in, the topic that you're working in. If you think there are certain people that are really going to be able to kind of dig down and give their honest opinion about what could kind of improve the proposal, or if it's at the cutting edge that you're claiming it to be. But if you aren't sure, then feel free to be honest about that with the commissioning editor, and they, you know, should be able to guide you. And as we say, we don't necessarily use the people that are suggested. We use that as a kind of starting point, and then we'll add in other names. This also helps, obviously, with anonymity and confidentiality, because you won't be told who were your peer reviewers. If you are providing a list, it's usually kind of like 6 names and above, so it won't be obvious who it is in the end. But it's really just kind of like a starting point to flag the people that are most relevant to your research, let's say, or most understanding of it.
That's great.
And sorry, Matthew, one extra thing to add is that you can't put someone who is, you know, your supervisor or something like that. It would need to be someone that doesn't have a personal connection to you.
Of course.
You know, academia is a small pond in some way, so it doesn't mean that you never have to have interacted with that person before, but it just could be someone that was directly your dissertation supervisor or someone from your own department or that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. Have I missed any questions from anybody before we finish? Because there was one slightly interesting one I wanted to ask, if I may, which was, Alex, you talked about sort of rogue journals, predatory journals. Do you have any examples of them? What would you ones which you'd really try and avoid and look out for?
So I don't have any recent ones off the top of my head. What I can point people to was a recent instance that happened with Liverpool University Press that they've been tackling, where one of their journals was basically replicated and a dummy version was made that was charging people to submit and they've released a series of blog posts about how they've tackled that, and they've given links to that site and how similar it unfortunately was, and the main difference was the fees, and they'd even managed to kind of, in terms, they were able to list previous content from the journal, and it was all quite accurate until you clicked on the articles, and the articles were a load of nonsense. So definitely kind of doing your due diligence and maybe spot checking a couple of those articles again, checking those board members and seeing if that matches up with their profiles elsewhere, that yes, they do work on this journal, checking submission guidance that's on the website for that journal. Again, if there is any kind of charge involved, which is very rare, particularly in the humanities, that is very transparently declared. And kind of as we said in the presentation, like you'll always have the right to withdraw your article at any point. So if you're starting to get cold feet anywhere through the process, or you're starting to get a bit suspicious, then you can always pull out. And again, we would definitely recommend talking to your libraries, talking to Think, Check, Submit, which was the organization that I included in the presentation. Yeah, they're all incredibly helpful resources, and I will see if I can find the blog post from Liverpool and put them in the chat.
I think we forget just how useful our librarians can be sometimes, don't we? They really do have a lot of expert knowledge of these kind of things. While you were speaking, I had one further question, if that's okay with you both. This is from Michel Gundrum, who's in the middle of peer-reviewed revisions for his first journal article, and asks, how much autonomy do I have in maintaining some of my content unchanged? Or how much risk is there that it'll just be turned down if they don't make every change requested? I think you touched on this, but this is sort of a direct question for somebody involved in the process. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can speak for journals. You definitely don't have to make every change that a peer reviewer suggests, but what we would possibly recommend is that you submit a statement to the editor explaining why you want to keep something the same. And that can be a bit more of a conversation or a back and forth, and you can kind of decide that together. So there wouldn't necessarily be a risk of being turned down. It's just that it would turn much more into like a back and forth conversation about deciding what would be best for the article versus what you would like to keep the same. So yes, that kind of answers it from the journal side. I don't know if it's the same on the books.
Yeah, very similar. I think I mentioned that if you've been asked to do a revised proposal, we'll usually also ask that you write a short response letter. So this is where you just kind of explain what you have changed, what kind of like the recommended changes that you've accepted and implemented in the proposal, but then you can also list out what you've chosen not to implement and your reasoning for that. In some cases, the peer reviewer suggestion might just be the reviewer's personal preference, in which case you're welcome to say, I really don't think that that's something I want to delve into in this book. I don't think I can give it, that kind of level of attention that it requires, and maybe this would be something to write about in a separate journal article. If it is something that they've asked you to do that they think is kind of really essential for the book, or really essential for how it will be pitched kind of marketing wise in the field, then that may be something that has to change. But you can consult with the commissioning editor on this, and if it did come to the situation where you really felt strongly that one reviewer's suggestions aren't what you want to go with for your book, the commissioning editor might, for example, commission another review to go to a third peer reviewer for that third kind of neutral opinion on the situation, so that it doesn't stall. But yeah, definitely be honest about it, and just submit that justification of why you don't want to make that change if it is something that you feel hesitant about, or book a meeting to discuss it with the commissioning editor further.
I think one final thing I would flag on the journal side is you can definitely push back on specific comments from a reviewer, but we would possibly advise against making no changes at all based on reviewer comments, particularly if you're in maybe a smaller field or a more niche area, and you end up taking that journal to taking that article to a second journal. It's very likely that you could get the same peer reviewers, and so if they see the exact same article with none of the changes, you're going to get the same decision. So So that's possibly something that we would advise against, but do push back when you feel that you need to or would like to.
Okay, I think that's the last question. So I'll kind of start the call time there. Just a few thanks, really. Thank you to all participants for really helping to handle that question and answer session. There were so many people taking part in this. It could have been really difficult, and you made it much easier by posting all of your questions in the chat. So thank you to all of you, and thank you for attending. Thank you to RSVP for putting on the event, which I've certainly found incredibly useful, and I know other people have too. And of course, last but by no means least, thank you to Elizabeth and Alex for their really, really informative and interesting presentations. Again, just a little plug, if you're not a member of RSVP, we've explained the benefits, please do consider joining us. If something occurs to you after this that you want to ask, I will put my email in the chat. You've also got, I think, the RSVP's communications email. Choose one of those. And if it's a really, really burning question, then with the agreement of Elizabeth and Alex, I will forward it on. But obviously, we'll moderate that depending on how many there are, and hopefully there won't be too many because we've had a really good session here. So if I just post that in, and for now, I will say again, thank you all for attending, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.